Valve springs are older than time itself. Every single combustion engine, what are you laughing at?
Older than time itself.
They are. Every single combustion engine that's ever been built has had one of these. And even before internal combustion engines were built, steam engines ran these. Valves are not new technology, but that doesn't mean to say they're easy to deal with. As we've mentioned, these, I mean, Christ, look.
They are very soft.
They are soft,
They're very
right?
soft.
So, valve dynamics. We can look at putting different ones in. Obviously, you can spend, what was it, 600 quid.
It was like 600 odd quid for the Supertech ones with the retainers.
Which is a lot of money,
ridiculous.
right? And bearing in mind that all it's going to do is add RPM. It's not actually going to give me any performance upgrades. Yeah. It's a bit of a tough one to swallow. But with a bit of cunning, we can look at some ways to get around that. I.e., just find a different cars one and buy them instead. In order to work out what valves you need, it's not just a simple case of measuring the valve. Can you find me a vernier? You do the measurements,
right,
I like
there you go, look.
So the obvious thing we need to do is the spring height, uncompressed, which is, and the width, which luckily in this instance will be the same top and bottom. You do get what's called beehive springs, where they taper and all this sort of stuff.
25.98, I think you just call it 26.
26 millimetre. And the inner diameter, 18.3 millimetre. So that's handy. That tells us the internal, the external and the height of the spring. But there's more that we need to consider here as well, because the different thickness of this spring, do we actually have a thickness measurement?
3.7.
So 3.7.
Oh, wait a minute, wait. Try again. There's a wee bit there where it's been ground.
Can we do it on the correct bit?
3.6.
When that compresses, this is also a point that we need to note, because depending on the thickness of this will dictate how much that spring compresses, along with the hardness of the metal that's made from. So how do you measure that? Because none of us are. Well, you hold one end and I'll.
Yeah, I mean, you can get, there is equipment to obviously test these properly, right? But
I've got a vice.
I don't think that's
Now, bear in mind, this isn't exactly going to tell me how much poundage we're doing, which is important, but it will tell me the compressed height. If we just go to full compression and then back it off a touch, our maximum compression is basically 29 millimetre. That is wild. We would not want that in an engine, but 29 millimetre is a hard limit, is our compressed length. So that should be enough for me to work out what these are. What I can do is a quick Google online and find out what the poundage of a standard MX5 spring is. Now the exhausts and the intakes in these are actually identical. I've measured both of them off camera, and we can see if we can find some vaguely similar that can work in here without having to spend 600 quid.
The Supertech ones, right, they use titanium retainers, which most people are like, oh, that's amazing, titanium retainers, they're lightweight, blah, blah, blah. But the thing is they're also very thin. Yeah. So it's for an engine that you're going to use quite a lot, titanium retainers are actually not ideal because they actually will wear. Yeah. So it becomes a very finite lifespan kind of thing, which you don't want. So we want to keep stock retainers, which means we need stiffer springs.
How do we find that?
The Google. That's
the mighty Google.
Literally the Google.
Buckets, also known as the bit between the cam and the valve. So this is the last bit we'll do whiteboard on, and I promise I'm not wanting to be a dentist when I grow up. This is a diagram of a bucket. So I've measured these as well because, again, we've got issues with buckets. We've also got a bit, which I'll get to. So the problem with the bucket, as we touched on earlier on, is when a big cam hits that, it's got the potential to literally scoop lift that adjustment shim out of there and chuck it into an engine and cause pain, misery and death. So modern engines now have the adjustment shim underneath here, which means that the cam hasn't got any chance of popping it out, and you know, life is great and everything else. Or you just buy a pre-measured one that doesn't have any loose parts at all. So I've measured up what the standard MX5 is, and interestingly enough, they've rounded it up quite well. It's 30 millimetres in diameter, 23 millimetres in height, and the actual adjusted height is 17.5 millimetres. So that is the bit that goes from the little plunger here to the top, and that's the important bit because that is setting the height from the cam to the valve. So I'm going to have a wee look and see if there's an off-the-shelf other OEM manufacturer. He's laughing. Look at his.
I've already put a bet on here that there is absolutely no chance that there's an OEM one that's exactly the same. Do you know why? Because Mazda are fantastic at picking different sizes from everybody else just for fun.
So yeah, great. Thanks for the optimism. But I'm going to see if I can anyway. There's a pretty good chance we can't because we've looked at some things, and Maruha, who are like MX5 tuning gods in the industry, they do a set of these for like 250 quid or something.
Yeah, they're actually really quite reasonable for what they are, to be honest.
That's less than 20 quid a unit. And bear in mind, if you were to go to any OEM and buy basic ones of these with the design we want, they're going to be more than 20 quid anyway.
They're probably going to be about the same price. So you're kind of.
I might be on at losing street and I might be down a tenner, but we'll see.
We did also think about other ways of doing this. If we were going to obviously regrind the valve seats and stuff like that, you would end up with less valve clearance. So the thought was, do we TIG weld these on and then get them reground to the correct clearance, which would solve the problem, but the machine time in that is probably going to cost more than 300 quid. So
we're gonna, if we're wanting to do this budget, by the way, budget's a stretch because it's going to cost a few hundred quid. That's not going to be a cost-effective route.
No.
So the last thing we want to discuss today, though, is camshafts, and for that we have backup. One exhaust cam from a BP4W Mark 1 MX5 engine.
We're keeping this as a backup plan because we found out that obviously exhaust cams have got more
lobe.
Yes, than the inlet. So worst case, we run 2 exhaust cams.
Yeah, I mean it's a working theory that we might be able to do this.
It's not going to be enough realistically.
Oh, don't be a fucking poopy mouth.
No, for the power that you want, it's not going to be enough, is it? But
it might be.
It's not.
It might be though.
It's not.
Why do you always have to rain in my parade? But the real reason we've took this out is
we found that so they ones right are solid lifters with a shim on top.
Let's just recap this quickly because we were under the assumption that these were hydraulic because I don't know, some reason.
Well, from my MX5 days, I remembered hydraulic lifters, right? So I was like, why has this got solid ones? So these are obviously that's just a solid piece of metal that's obviously machined, and then this is what does obviously your valve clearance is this shim.
Yeah.
But these ones, as you can see, don't have the
shim over the bucket.
But I think these are hydraulic because they're definitely hydraulic.
Right. So that's how these charge up. See the groove there? So your oil comes up through the head and that wee port there, and it charges these up. And I got really excited because I didn't see a shim in the top, and I thought, could they be?
No, because that's what I remembered with my MX5 that I was like, it had hydraulic lifters. So this is obviously
it could not be because it's although.
But the question is though,
could we just use those?
Is how much RPM will these take? Don't know.
No?
I don't know.
I don't know.
Probably not 8,000.
Well, let's measure them and see the difference. So the differences dimensionally between these two are nil. Mm-hmm. So the Mark 1 has the same 30mm diameter. It's still got the same skirt height of about 23 to 24mm. However, internally they're the same as well, because I can make that down to 17.5 as per that. But the problem comes, those are obviously not solid.
These just get fed engine oil pressure. The idea is that it inflates it, takes all the valve lash out, which is great because it means it's like no maintenance, engine's super quiet, blah blah blah. But when you start really hammering them with lots of revs, like 7,000 plus, they struggle to stay inflated.
Yeah.
So they start to obviously just go at that and squish down.
And also, like crucially, there's too many moving parts in here to take above 7,000 RPM. They're just going to start to degrade because there are too loose parts in there. That's not going to enjoy that RPM.
Yeah. The usual, I mean, the kind of given for these usually is if an engine's doing like 7.2, they're fine. Yeah. Anything more than that, and you're kind of
you're into the destruction land. So that was a nice idea, but it won't work. So the interesting point to note though, we have went from 2 generations of MX5, the Mark 1 hydraulic, the Mark 2 solid with bucket over.
The thing is, I'm not really sure why they went away from this, because it's not a super high revving engine. You know, this is going to be much quieter, and it's maintenance free.
It's weird. I don't understand the logic either.
don't
Unless
see
it might have been a cost thing.
Maybe.
Yeah.
That's true, actually, yeah, because this will be cheaper than that, obviously. So.
But do you know what my next thought is? What did the VVT get? Did they stick with that, or do we maybe get to VVT land and we find the glorious shim under bucket?
Maybe we just want every single type of lifter that you can imagine.
Well, and this might be the Hail Mary. You never know.
They just tried them all. They just had a go at them all.
You just never know. Anyway, let's just take more heads off of MX5 engines. The cam cover off the MX5 episode. Stay tuned, where we take more engines to bits for no reason whatsoever. So I've had a wee look, and the cross compatibility between the Mark 1 and the Mark 2 pre-facelift, which is 99 to 2000 cylinder heads, is not great. So the background to this was the exhaust cams on all of the MX5 engines have a larger lobe size than the inlet cams, obviously for more evacuation than drawing air in. Now, the idea here is we could have used the exhaust cam as an inlet cam, which would have given us more lift duration and been a cheap way of getting around the problem. Obviously, the exhaust cams have the drive for what was previous generations worth of coils and such, which we could have lopped off. That's not an issue. However, I was onto a winner, I thought, because the Mark 1 cam actually has taller lobes on the exhaust than even the Mark 2 one does. And I was like, ooh, this is great. However, what I've established the reason for that is because of the hydraulic lifters. It obviously has to have a taller cam, but the profile is completely different. Mainly because if the peaks was too shallow, it would just start banging the oil out of the lifter on the Mark 1, and it wouldn't be a hydraulic lifter anymore, it would be dead. So they're just not gonna work. That's kind of the height of it. If we're gonna do cams in this, we're gonna have to go and buy aftermarket cams. And that's gonna be a cost. Now, I won't take the credit for this. I'm standing on the shoulders of giants, as I quite often do, by going on forums and looking at old historic posts. Turns out somebody way back in the history of trying to make any power engines sussed out that Volvo springs from like this generation that's running up the screen right now are actually roughly dimensionally and compression matched to what these are, but twice the poundage. In fact, I think it's more than that it works out at. So I thought, brilliant, that's great. Unfortunately, the forum post is about 5 years old, and in that time Volvo have completely abandoned ever supporting that legacy product. It must be out of like a 1960s overhead valve number. It's gone. The chances of me getting one involves shopping in the United States, paying for the postage, paying for the customs, and to be honest, that comes out roughly the same as just buying aftermarket valve springs with a higher compression ratio. So again, not much of a saving. The other option is I could just keep hunting and find something a bit more modern that might work, but I might still do that, but it's going to take time. So, on to the last thing that we're going to try and change in this head to generate more power, the buckets. Now we measured this and I went online and did the thing for days, and one thing I've learned, Google is humped. I remember back when the internet was first kind of coming around, I'm an old person, there used to be useful information on it, not anymore. Nah, it's gone. That's just nothing, it's just ads everywhere. So trying to find any sort of tangible information on varying manufacturers' dimensions of buckets that have the shims underneath them, just doesn't exist. And maybe that's deliberate, maybe not, but there's definitely not a lot of people doing what I'm doing right now and reporting their findings online. And if they are, they're hiding it really well. So that's not a problem either, because again, the cost versus hassle ratio comes into play. I have found that Maruha, who do the throttle bodies, also do a shim under bucket lifter bucket thing that is okay. I mean, if I was to go and find a bucket that works and then go to a manufacturer and buy them new, because you're not going to buy used buckets, it's going to come out more or less the same as what I'm finding the set of good aftermarket buckets from Maruha are. The sum of all this is I'm going to have to buy everything new, aftermarket and performance. And this is where it gets a bit sticky, because the bill for all that's coming in at somewhere close to about 1,300 quid. Roughly the same as a turbo. For what's going to be about 20 horsepower more, realistically. Do we do this? Or do we just look at something else? It's a lot of work and a lot of money for not a lot of performance gains, but you've got to look at the bigger picture. It's the engine that's designed to go in the car, it's usable, it's drivable, it's potentially, if we go down the line, might even be compliant with certain race series. But I'm really struggling. I am really, really struggling to see why people justify doing any builds on stock engines when it's just as easy to bang a turbo on and half the bloody price. So at this stage, I'm going to go back to the drawing board. Well, I'm going to put a pin in it. I have a plan for how to use all of these engines to make something that's a bit fruity without using a turbo, but I'm going to have to dwell on it. I'm actually going to have to save up and properly spend money on it, if I'm being honest. I don't just have 1,500 quid lying about. But it gives me time to ponder, and also gives me time to put it open to the floor to you guys. There may be some MX5 experts watching that actually know of some solutions that I've not thought of. But yeah, the remit, 8,000 RPM, push it as close to 200 horsepower as I can get, and see what happens. I do have an amount of engines kicking about to do this with, and I don't really fancy spending War and Peace. Comments below, hit me up, educate me, I'm always willing to learn. But I'm going to dwell, and we're going to go back onto that. In the meantime, patreon.com/toolsandtrack if you feel like thanking us for some of the research we've done here. Obviously we'll publish all findings and then we do from here on. If that's not for you, I get it, but do the like bell, subscribe, and the share thing, do the share thing, that's quite handy. There's got to be MX5 people out here that don't watch this yet, and if you know them, let them know, it'd be nice. Anyway, I need to go back to the drawing board, so until next weekend guys, drive safe.